Alright, hi guys. Hopefully you had a good weekend. With the next video, this is page 11 in your notes, and probably we're going to be able to finish up the notes with just 2, maybe 3 more videos. Page 11 and page 12 are the last page of notes. Page 13 just kind of reviews everything. But this particular video, hopefully it should be kind of short. It's just on page 11, okay? So we finished up, last week we finished up with anaerobic respiration. That's what happens when there is no oxygen. And first you have glycolysis, that makes pyruvate, and then NADH2 has to drop off those hydrogen to somewhere, so you have fermentation and 2 options, and you either get lactic acid fermentation or you get alcoholic fermentation. But in both cases, fermentation does not produce any more ATP. So anaerobic respiration, you have a net gain of just 2 ATP, both came from glycolysis. Okay, so that's a quick review. But now for aerobic respiration, the introduction paragraph says, unlike aerobic respiration, a cell that uses oxygen for respiration can remove much more energy from glucose. It can do this because after a series of reactions, oxygen will accept the hydrogen. So that's what's going to happen. Removed by oxidation during aerobic sequence. Pyruvic acid breakdown and the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain will occur in the powerhouse of the cell known as the mitochondria. Okay, so aerobic respiration, we've talked about this a bunch of times, but aerobic respiration happens inside the mitochondria. So all anaerobic, that all occurred out in the cytosol or cytoplasm. They mean the same thing, so if you don't know that, make sure that you write that down. Okay, that basically glycolysis makes pyruvate out in the cytoplasm, and if fermentation happens, that also occurs just floating around in the cytoplasm. But now aerobic, what happens is if oxygen is present, basically your pyruvate here is going to go into the mitochondria. So this represents inside the mitochondria, and that's where the rest is going to occur. Okay, real quick, just a quick breakdown here. Aerobic respiration has 3 steps. This video is going to particularly pay attention to this first step, okay? But there are 3. So you have pyruvic acid breakdown, or PAB for short, and you might see me list either one. Okay, so pyruvic acid breakdown is PAB, okay? Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. One of the hard things about this unit is a lot of stuff has multiple names. This is one of it. So the next step, the next video is going to talk about is the Krebs cycle. That same name for that is the citric acid cycle. So they mean the same thing. And then finally, we have what's called the electron transport chain, or the ETC. And again, I'll explain that in the next video. Okay, but for this video, I wanted to make sure that we understood pyruvic acid breakdown, or PAB. So you have pyruvate, okay? The pyruvate goes through a little protein here and into the mitochondria where aerobic's going to occur, okay? And on your notes, steps for aerobic phase, letter A, it says it begins with glycolysis. We just talked about that, so you have to start with your pyruvate. And then it says B, the pyruvic acid produced during glycolysis is transported into the cristae of the mitochondria. So it goes through this little protein into the cristae. Okay, so this is into that fluid area that's inside of the mitochondria. Okay, and your notes do a good job. It shows pyruvate. And it basically shows what happens, where you take your pyruvic acid and you convert it into what we call a 2-carbon acetyl group. Okay, and you can see that on your paper. So when you do that, you're taking a 3-carbon pyruvate, turning it into a 2-carbon acetyl group, so you have to break off a CO2. Okay, so that's one of the CO2s that you breathe out comes off during this step. Okay, and you also produce an NADH, because 1 hydrogen came off as well. Okay, so carbon dioxide is given off and an NADH is formed. Okay, so that's basically it for pyruvic acid breakdown. But what happens at the end of this is another thing called coenzyme A. Okay, again, it's a coenzyme. It's helping these processes occur. When the CO2 comes off, coenzyme A comes in, and that basically attaches to your acetyl group. And what coenzyme A is, it's again basically a carrier molecule. Just like NAD and FAD carry hydrogen, coenzyme A is going to carry your acetyl group. And what it's going to do is it's going to carry it to the next phase, which is your Krebs cycle. Okay, so this acetyl group is going to be carried into the Krebs cycle by this CoA. And when CoA is on here, this product, so we say pyruvic acid breakdown produces, at the end, acetyl-CoA. So it is an acetyl group, which is your 2-carbon group. Acetyl just means 2 carbons. And CoA, so acetyl-CoA. And again, CoA is going to take it up into take it over into the Krebs cycle. Okay, so you can see from your picture there's a pretty good diagram, but again, you're starting with pyruvate. NAD comes in and leaves as NADH. And on your notes, make sure you add that. The NADH is not on there. So at the very bottom of the page, NAD comes in and leaves as NADH. And coenzyme A comes in and CO2 comes off. On this diagram, it's a little bit backwards, but it's the same thing. Basically, CO2 comes off, coenzyme A comes in. So coenzyme A attaches to your acetyl group and is going to take the acetyl group into the Krebs cycle, which is next. Okay. During this pyruvic acid breakdown, make sure that you know there are 0 ATP. Make a note of this. So the only 2 things you get from pyruvic acid breakdown are your acetyl-CoA and an NADH. And then this H on the NAD, that's going to go into, at the end, the electron transport chain. And we'll talk about that in the next video. Okay, so stay tuned for probably, I'm thinking the last video, just because page 13 is just kind of a summary. So I'm thinking the last video that we're going to talk about is page 12, and we're going to finish up with this Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. So please stay tuned.